Welcome to the Julia Mutha channel. This year, my plan is to bring you a new author interview every month to introduce you to new authors, their books, and also their words of wisdom. This way, you'll be learning not only from me, but from other authors who have different experiences than what I have had. So I'm really excited to begin this month with memoir writer Juanita Mantz, who will do some readings, share a little bit about her book, and tell us about her literary influences and her writing process. So let me tell you a little bit more about her. Juanita is a writer, performer, and USC Law educated lawyer, deputy public defender. Her stories have been published in literary journals, newspapers, and magazines. Jem is also an alumni of the VONA Writing Workshop and an alumni of the Macondo Writers Workshop for writers striving to change the world. She has a memoir about her young adult years, Tales of an Inland Empire Girl, and an International Latino Book Award gold medal winning chapbook titled Portrait of a Deputy Public Defender, or How I Became a Punk Rock Lawyer. She also serves as a board member of Inlandia Institute. She loves punk rock music and has presented her stories at the UCR Writers Week and UCR Punk Conference, Beyond Baroque, and AWP. She was the 2022 Writer in Residence at Pasadena City College. She's also in a low residency MFA, which we will talk about. I have some questions about that. And a creative writing program at, is it UNO, UNO, with a nonfiction focus, and is working on adapting her memoir into a stage play. So, wow, welcome. Really happy
Thank
to have
you.
you.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much.
Okay, so let's begin with, so first I have to say this is her book, and I absolutely loved it. There was so much in there that I could relate to and that I think her readers could relate to. So I'm going to ask you first to tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about why you wrote that book. So let's just start with that.
Yeah, so I started working on this book when my father died. So the book is called Tales of an Inland Empire Girl. It's a memoir. It starts with my dad's death when I'm 36, and then it flashes back to my childhood. And the majority of the book is told in present tense, young adult narrative voice. I wrote the book, now I know that I wrote the book to bring my father back to life, right? And to moralize my childhood. I'm also a high school dropout who ended up at USC Law School, so it was also to reconcile that shame and stigma I had. And as RuPaul says, take what's most shameful and turn it into your sword, turn it into the thing most powerful. And I think the book did that for me. It took me 16 years to get it from inception to publication. And in the interim, the year before Tales of an Inland Empire Girl came out during COVID and after George Floyd was murdered, I actually wrote a chapbook of social justice essays and memoir and poetry about my job as a deputy public defender called Portrait of a Deputy Public Defender, or How I Became a Punk Rock Lawyer. And that came out first. And that's where
Oh,
the magic started. And then my podcast was around that same time. So really, it's like all this stuff during COVID happened. My
yeah.
podcast, my two books, and my goal, and this is why my books came out really in the end. I had been working on my book for so long, overworking on it at some point. It was ready probably a couple years before. And when COVID hit, I thought, I do not want to die with my books in a drawer.
And that's a really great reason to start, is because we keep our stories inside us almost too long sometimes. And yeah, you don't want to keep them in there forever, because then they're not helping you and they're not helping anyone else. So, well, wonderful. So you
And just
answered
really
my next
quick,
question,
but
which is how long it took you. So did it take you that long because you were still writing, or because you were doing edits, or didn't feel comfortable releasing it? What was the reason?
no, I basically wrote the book in short stories that I published in different journals, one story at a time, standalone stories. So
Okay.
I had pretty much all the stories done. And, there's different writers here. There's the beginning writer, there's the middle writer, there's the mature writer. And then after I had all the stories, it took me almost 2 years to collate them, get
Mm,
the narrative thread, take out the repetition, edit it and re-edit it with my publisher, Los Nietos Press, Frank Kearns, who's a fantastic. But I think you know, in the end, that's how long it was supposed to take, because the mother
Right.
character in this book really morphed from a villain to more of a very understandable, hardworking Latina mom. My dad was a white man. He was a drunk, but he was a loving father. He owned a bar. We lost everything my senior year of high school when I dropped out. So I think
Mm.
I had to, with memoir, I was just going to say you need space.
Yes.
You need space to put your life in perspective. Right now, I'm writing about my infertility struggles, and that was
Mm.
almost 12 years ago that I went through in vitro. So
Yeah.
it took me that many years to reconcile that issue as well. So
Yeah.
I
It
think
takes
memoir.
time for it to just percolate right inside
Hmm.
you. And are there then stories that didn't make it to the book?
There are.
Yeah.
I took a couple stories out just because in the original draft of the book, that it's about me and my sister Annette and my twin sister Jackie, and really it's about sisterhood. That's the other theme of the book. But some of the stories from high school were not my stories to tell. They were my sister's stories. So I took
Gotcha.
those stories out and replaced them with stories where I talked about me and my two best friends. So the beginning of the book is heavy on the sisters. The latter high school years of the book, when Jenny Juanita drops out, is more focused on Jenny and her friends, best friends
Okay.
Melinda and Tracy. So they kind of replace the sisters in the book. So I think memoir, it's important to tell your own story unless you're writing for someone else. I don't think
Right.
it's really our place to tell other people's stories. Every story is going to have overlap with other people's stories, but you need to focus on
Yeah.
what you're focused on your part of it, right?
Right. Well, how do you decide that it's your story and not someone else's story, especially if it happened to all of you, right?
Well, especially with the twin sister, we have a lot of
Yeah.
shared experiences and shared perspectives. But there's
Right.
certain stories about her life, certain things that happened to her alone that I would
Right.
only be telling as a third party narrator. So I think
Yeah.
anything that she was involved in, I felt comfortable. Like we have a Kager party senior year. She was there. She's in the story, but the
Yeah.
focus is more me and my two best friends. But she's there. She's not, she's a peripheral character, but she's there at the beginning. But like, I think that if there's some like big event that happens to a family member, you can
Hmm.
talk about how it affected you, but should you be talking about it if they're not really comfortable sharing it? I don't know. And like,
Yeah.
for example, my dad, senior year of high school, my half sister Barbara died, my dad's first daughter.
Mm.
And
Um,
my dad locked himself in the bathroom and almost shot himself. And
wow.
that's in the book because I
Yeah.
felt this, my dad's a huge part of this book. He's passed.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think you really have to decide, are you comfortable telling other people's stories or are you more comfortable just telling your rendition of your life? That's
Right.
for me true memoir. Now lots of people write their mom's story in their mom's voice. That's a different thing. I'm talking about
Yeah.
when you're writing in first person narration, present tense is what I write in. And I don't
Right.
really, Jenny doesn't know other people's stories necessarily. She's telling you what her mom's told her. She's
Right.
not telling you her mom's story because mom hasn't told her everything. There's a
Right.
thing about my father and about his daughter's death that was a baby that the babysitter killed, that the story in the
Mm.
book is not everything that happened because Jenny didn't know what really happened. She only
Right.
knows what they told her, but it turns out dad might have been inappropriate with the babysitter and all this stuff before he met my
Mm.
mom and had a baby with her, and that was the baby that died. Or maybe it was his other daughter from his wife. So there's a lot of
Right.
secrets that you're not always going to be able to get to the bottom of. So I decided to write in first person present tense so that
Yeah.
the narrator is Jenny and it's her truth as she knows it as a child. It's
Okay.
not her
That's
truth
great.
now. Yeah.
Right. Right. So you're seeing it from her perspective at that age, whatever she understood, even because even things she knows, she
Mhm.
probably doesn't understand everything she's seen. Right.
Exactly. Like even with language, I
Yeah.
use the term weddle, and I
Yeah.
spelled with the W in the book purposefully because that's how Jenny thought it was spelled. I know it's spelled with a G, but I
Yeah. Yeah.
purposefully spelled it with a W. So,
Ah,
like, I think first person present tense is hard because it's hard to bring in the adult reflective voice, but
right.
I didn't
Right.
really want the adult reflective voice. I wanted scenes, I wanted
Yeah.
dialogue, I wanted
Yeah.
character, plot
Right.
and reflection really didn't matter to me as much, at least in this book.
Yeah, yeah, I like that. I like that because you can relate more to the character. You're really living in that character's head.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I thought that was a great choice. I really loved it. So you
And
mentioned
really
as far
quick,
as
I
oh,
also think I did that because of Judy Blume. I grew up
oh
reading
yeah.
Judy Blume, and she writes in present tense scene.
Ah, okay,
Weird.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. And we do that, right? So we borrow or tend to imitate sometimes some of the authors that have influenced us. So, yeah, great. So you mentioned then the theme of sisterhood. Are there other
Mhm.
themes that are also in the book?
Definitely. There's grief,
Yeah,
there's dysfunction. The mother is abusive verbally and physically, but you really don't understand until you keep on seeing. Like, in the end, there's two themes that are literary. The first theme is Don Quixote. So I
yeah.
figured out right before I was set to publish this, and so I had to do a little bit of editing, that from one of my MFA professors, that my dad was Don Quixote. He was always
Ah,
chasing windmills. He bought this
interesting.
bar, couldn't rub two nickels together, quit his job, and my poor mother was just following him around like Sancho Panza, right? And
Yeah,
so it made more sense to me when I was able to put my dad as this character, my poor mom watching him chase windmills, right? And
yeah,
lose everything as a result. And my mom was the hardest working person. She worked two jobs. She was a waitress and she worked the graveyard at Circle K when my dad owned that bar. So she was always tired.
yeah,
So, and my dad was always drunk and carousing out at bars. So, once that's one theme, right? And then the other
yeah,
theme is Wizard of Oz. It's not, I never say it overtly in the book, but the
yeah.
whole book is about Jenny coming home.
Oh,
So,
okay.
Jenny
Yeah, I see
starts
that.
out coming home to see her dad who's sick. Dad,
Right.
ends up
Yep.
passing. I don't want to give it away, but he ends up passing sometime towards the beginning of the book. We flash back to Jenny, and then we flash forward to the funeral, and then Jenny moves home.
Yeah, yeah,
Because Jenny's pretending. Jenny is Eliza Doolittle. She's a corporate lawyer. No one knows she's a high school dropout. No one
mm,
knows that her mom's a waitress and her dad's a trucker. Everyone thinks she grew up upper class, right?
yes,
So she's pretending. And so
right.
she is not herself. So the
Yes.
whole book is about Jenny coming home, that there's no place like home, right?
Yeah, I see that. I see that.
Yeah.
Also, it seems like what you're just saying here too is that, and I think that happens with a lot of us, but maybe especially in immigrant or Latino communities where we are almost pretending. So we go
Mhm.
out, we leave our family, we go out into the real world, and we don't mention the struggles that we have in our own family, whether it's financial or any other, right? So we go out, and I did get that feel from your book too, that you were someone else when you were, being your hotshot lawyer, right? But when
Mhm.
you're coming home, you're a different person, and yeah, and so it's kind of hard to blend the two, you think?
Yeah, and music's a big part of that. I never listened to my punk rock when I was in Houston
Mm,
and San Francisco as a corporate, and until towards the end. I didn't go to concerts. I'd stopped going to shows. I dressed very respectable. And it's only when I moved back home that I found my music and my concerts again. I mean, I
yeah.
always had a little bit of it, but I really got back into it. I started dressing a little more funky in court, started
Mhm.
finding who I am,
Yeah,
who I
yeah,
want to be as a public defender. I don't want
yeah,
to represent corporations. I want to represent the underdog and the poor guy that's charged with the DUI in
right,
Ontario or in Riverside, And
right.
this, your book about your parents that you fictionalized, it talks a
Yeah,
lot about blue collar life and what the
right.
American dream is and whether it really exists, right?
Right, right, right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. And maybe that's why I really enjoyed your book so much is because I could see that, I could see that struggle with accepting yourself as who you are. And also, you mentioned your mom. Your mom's very real though. She is who
Mhm.
she is.
Mhm.
And I don't know if that did that create maybe a disconnect with you? Like it was really hard to accept somebody who was just who she is. She's just a hardworking person. She does come off as really harsh as you're
Mhm.
reading the book and you're thinking, wow, she does seem abusive with her kids and yelling at them and throwing them out of the house. but then you
And
also
that
feel really
that was her
sorry for
coping
her.
mechanism. She doesn't want to abuse us. So
Right.
she
Well,
makes
yeah.
us leave, get the F out, run
Yeah.
to the park. So really she's protecting us by making us leave because she knows back
Yeah.
then there was not a lot of treatment for mental illness or hysteria or whatever, bipolar, whatever you would call it now. And so
Yeah.
she knew if she kicked us out, she could manage her emotions better alone than with
Right.
these kids there. And she did not want to hurt us.
Right.
My mom and I are like best friends now. She's the most loving person you'll ever meet. She wouldn't hurt a fly. My dad was her trigger. When my father died when I was 36 is the very first time I ever hugged my mother in my
Mm.
whole life. And I say in the book, she must have hugged me when I was a baby, right? Maybe not. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
she didn't have those skills. Her own mother died when she was 14 and she tried to commit suicide. And then she
Wow.
was put in an orphanage by her father. Her
Yeah.
father abandoned her to an orphanage. And in the book, I talk about how she took care of her father despite that. We visited
Right.
him every Saturday in Norco. So the other thing that we really need to talk about is place, right? The book is
Yeah.
called
Yeah.
Tales of an Inland Empire Girl. And in the end, it's a love letter to the Inland Empire. I mean, really, I
Yeah.
tried to recreate Ontario. I tried to
Mhm.
recreate Norco. I tried to recreate Upland, these places that I knew so well as a kid and still know. I mean, I live 15 miles from where I grew up.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that comes through in the book. Again, another thing I really loved is you could really feel what it was like to live in those places. The
Mm-hmm.
drive-in they go to, or all these different places, you could really feel being there. So I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank
So
you.
how difficult is it to, and I kind of know that, but maybe for listeners, how difficult is it to write about, family drama and the things
Mm-hmm.
that you went through?
It was really hard when it was almost published. I did a live storytelling showcase where I read a story and I had to read without notes. So I didn't have my story in front of me. It was just from memory. And I intimated at some point that it was late and dark in the park and that
Hmm.
you could make the assumption that we spent the night in the park. So
Yeah.
the podcast ends. It was a live one. My mom calls me, my sisters call me,
Oh,
crying, like
wow.
so angry. We never slept at the park. Mom always picked us up. I said, I know that, but I was reading this live and I know I made a little flub. I'm not going to like correct myself in the middle of a story. It's not going to be published like that. I said, you know what? I'll throw away the book. If it's really going to cause this much controversy, I'm done. I was like, I'm done. The book's done. And then they called me back and they said, yeah, just work on it. And in the end, when they all read it, and this is many years of iterations, many edits, many changes. Mom
Yeah.
goes from being black and white character to very gray. Dad goes from being a hero to a flawed, loving father who's really, really not a hero, an anti-hero. And
Yeah.
they said it came out good. Like it came out
Yeah.
good. Now, I mean, my mom will still go to readings and be like, it's all lies. But that's just depends on what day it is.
Yeah.
She's okay. She's giving it to her friends. I think she actually comes across as very loving, but mercurial. And then the father is clearly Latinos understand her. My friend
Yes.
Michelle Gonzalez, who wrote her own memoir, said,
Yeah.
your poor mom, dude, she was so flipping tired, your
Yes.
poor mom. So people that know this culture and know people and like you said, understand the character will see that she's not really mean.
Right.
She
Right.
wants Jenny. And when the last scene, when Jenny drops out of high school, she's pissed at Jenny because Jenny was a straight A student that dropped out of high school 5 units short and did not listen to her and is going to end up a waitress just like she was.
Right.
And she dropped out of high school just like my mom did. So
Hmm.
Jenny as a character is, I mean, to this day, my mom will say, Jenny dropped out of high school. And I went to USC Law School and I graduated UCR magna cum laude. But
And that's
that's
what you did.
because that was my mom. I broke my mom's heart in half when
Yes.
I was her hope.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Yeah.
My mom will say things to me because I quit teaching for a while. I taught elementary school and I quit teaching to raise my firstborn. And then
Mm,
at the same time, I ended up getting a book published. So to be a
wow.
writer. And she would say the same thing, the disappointment, of why would you quit a job with benefits and just to be a mom? And I would say things like, well, that's what you did. And, you're a
Yeah.
mom and that's great. And she says, yeah, but I didn't want that life for you.
Mm,
So same, the same sort of disappointment. You want your children to do better than you.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
she taught us to read when I was 3. She sat
Wow.
with me at that kitchen
Wow.
table. I was reading Harlequin romance novels at 5. I was reading F. Scott Fitzgerald by 10. I read Gone
Wow.
with the Wind like 5 times by the age of 12. I'd
Yes.
read
Yes.
every book in the library by like 15. I would just read a book a day.
Yeah.
A
And that's one
book
of
a
the things
day.
you get from your memoir as well, is that you are always with a book. You're always reading. It's like your escape from
Yeah.
your life. Yeah. Yeah.
It still is. I mean, I still
Is
read a
it?
lot. Yeah, for my literary podcast that I have, I'll read the books and people are like, "How do you read so fast?" I'm like, and I comprehend. I don't speed read. Like I just read fast and comprehend fast. And
Yeah. Yeah.
it's
That's
just a
great.
special talent. I forget what
Yeah.
it's called, but it's some kind of thing that you accelerated reader or something, whatever it's called. It's
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of on the spectrum, they say. Some people that have this are on the spectrum, which I don't
That's
think I
great,
am,
though.
but I have that
It's a good
superpower.
talent to have.
Oh, I'll be in court and someone's like, "Did you read that police report?" I'm like, "Yeah." They're like, "It took you like 1 minute." I'm like, "Okay.
Wow.
You want me to tell you what it says?" People don't. When I was a little girl in school, you don't remember they would have us read a page or read 2 pages. So I'd read, and then the teacher would be like, "Jenny, you need to read that." I already
Yeah.
did, and they
You
would
already
get
did
mad
it.
at me, and I would tell them what it said, and they're like, "Oh, okay." Then they left
Wow.
me
Wow.
alone. Let me
Yeah,
read what it
that
said.
is a good that's a good
Yeah.
talent. I'm a very slow reader, so I admire that. Um, okay, so what do you see? So we covered the personal. What do you see as universal in your book?
Mm. I think the universal is the home aspect, right? If
Hmm.
you can pick a place to write about for people who are writers that are listening in that resonates with you, that's home, right? It doesn't have to be
Right,
your literal home. It can be your grandma's house, wherever it is. I think if
right.
you write about those places, they're special. And
Hmm.
it's almost automatic writing. If you can find
Yes.
those memories that you have, because, like, for example, there's a story called Grandpa's House,
Hmm.
and it's about us going to my grandpa's house every weekend or every other weekend, my whole childhood. And so the story is really a composite of many visits, probably, right? But I have
Okay.
it in my head and in my memories that day. But that
Yeah,
doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfectly aligned, right? But
right.
I
Right.
think it's really important when you write memoir to double check your sources. I double checked every musical reference. And then afterwards, and I changed one. I had referenced a Smith's album that wasn't out yet. So it was actually the
Mm.
first Smith's album that I was misremembering which album I was listening to
Yeah.
when the Challenger explosion happened. And
Mm.
I changed it. And then a couple of my friends who are music aficionados, I hang out with a lot of music people, said, "I checked all your music references." And I was like, "Oh, I'm so glad I did that," because there's people that will double check your dates, your
Oh,
films that you
yeah.
reference. I checked everything after I wrote it. So
Yes.
I
Yes.
write in a trance state. So I will do a free write to start a story, write in a trance state for like a couple hours. And then Grandpa's story came out full. Grandpa's house, the story about my grandpa, that came out fully formed. I've never edited one word. It came out fully
Oh,
formed in
wow.
two
Wow.
hours. It's the only story that I did that with. But most
Wow.
stories, I start with a free write and then I go back and edit it and expand it, expand it, expand it. Then I start checking my sources, my
Okay.
memory. I'll have someone read it, like my sister Annie, who has a great memory. "Hey, do you remember this? Where was that house?" Or, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah, yeah, that's great. Yeah, yeah. No, I think going back to Universal, I think that what you just said about, home and it doesn't even if nobody's been to the Inland Empire, because of your descriptions, your details, your references to things in the 80s,
yeah.
anybody could picture that and they could picture their own house. So as you're, mentioning going like your grandpa's store, I remember you guys walking to get candy at a little liquor store or something. And, I remember doing that as a little kid too,
Mm-hmm.
going to the little Altadena store to get whatever candy bars we used to get for a quarter, right? And,
Yeah, yeah. Or a
who hasn't
nickel,
done that
right?
as a little kid?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of, universal or just the relationships and the struggles with siblings or with parents, all of that. So just, yeah, just beautiful, beautiful book. So you talked about being a quick reader. Would you like to read something for us?
Ah, okay. I'll read a poem. I don't
Okay.
want to take up too much time reading a story, but just so you all know, my chapbook is poetry, memoir, and social justice essay. But my memoir, right before, about a year before it came out, I decided to add poetry to the very end. So I'm going to read one of those poems because I think poetry, with the emotion of it, captures something different that you really can't tell in a story. So this is
Okay.
about kind of me and how I see myself in retrospect. And this
Okay.
story was written in San Francisco. And it's called iPod, which kind of dates it. If anyone doesn't know what an iPod was, it was almost like a telephone that had music only on it, and you could put it on your headphones and take it with you when you went running. So this is circa 2007, probably I wrote this. iPod,
Okay.
San Francisco. Walking through the subway, I feel invincible. Not at all like my normal self. The white headphones signify an ascent of sorts. The epitome of coolness, I tap my feet on an escalator, humming. It feels good to be distant. Lost in the sound of bass and drum, I smile. No longer anxious, no need to meet other eyes. My audio sunglasses bathe me in blissful anonymity. Do others feel this peaceful? I know the immersion is an illusion. I am drowning, feeling nothing except the rhythms running in my head, fast and slow. I am addicted. I switch from White Stripes to Miss Dynamite to Amy Mann to my high school days with a little of the Pixies, Erasure, then some Cure. Joy Division. I feel like a teenager again, hanging out in the quad, smoking stale cigarettes stolen from my dad, wanting to be someone, anyone but me. Blue black hair, stud earring in one nostril before that was overdone. Bright red thermals cover legs that I will always be ashamed of. Only later will I see this as a costume, a masquerade, designed to hide the pure sadness of that time, to obscure the goals I had abandoned in hopelessness by age 16. I want to yell, girl, all is not lost. No, but years will be lost. Drinking, trying to dull the sharpness of it all, but somehow, some way, I will emerge, defiant and proving wrong all who had given me up for dead, a high school dropout, a statistic. Never humble, I knew I was powerful and equal to all of them. But regardless, here I am walking to the beats in my head, my feet pounding the moving sidewalk, and suddenly I cannot suppress the urge to run. Thank you.
Oh, yay. Very good. Okay, I love that. I love the way that you perform your readings. So I'm going to ask you about your one-woman show. That is
Mm,
something that you are currently creating, or
yes.
yes. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, you know, my process is a little weird. I'm not taking the book and making it into a one woman show.
Okay.
I think those stories are written and performance is different. And I really want this to be a form of like almost like stand up comedy meets narrative storytelling live without notes. So
Okay.
the way that I'm doing it, there are some stories that will be from this book, but they won't be as they're written because written word and performance is very different. There's a story about my dad's bar, the Big O, that I just did at a theater, and I cut a lot of the clunkiness of it to perform it
Yeah.
because sometimes I couldn't get my breath, right?
Right.
If
Right.
there's too much dialogue and you're having to go back and forth between dialogue and exposition, just cut the exposition, right? Turn it into
Mm,
a scene, turn it into heavy dialogue, switch characters, take a pause. So I do stuff like that when I turn a story into a performance piece. Um,
okay.
and then the thing I'm doing right now to work on my one woman show, which is kind of weird, I'm recording myself as I'm driving to work, telling a story live, and
Yeah.
I'm not going into my car knowing what story I'm telling.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I'm doing it all, just let my subconscious come through while I'm driving because I tend
Yeah.
to zone out when I'm driving anyways. And like I have it on a device where I don't have to touch it or anything because I can edit it later. And it's just
Yeah.
recording me as I drive, even with some of the background noise, it's okay. And then I
Yeah.
listen to it. And the first two were horrible. I was like, oh, I'm going to release it, but I'm going to heavily edit it. They're kind of clunky. The one I just did, I found the magic. The story just started coming. I just
Yeah.
started talking. I was really vulnerable. It did not sound performed. It did not sound rehearsed. It was just me on a stage of sorts in my car by myself.
Yeah,
Telling
yeah.
you a
Interesting.
story that's true, that's live, that's unedited, unfiltered. It's the only way I know how to do it.
So you record them and then you release them on your
On my
podcast?
podcast as a special
Okay.
episode. So the
Okay.
first two are already on there. The one that's coming out next week I really like. I watched this movie called Sing Sing about the theater arts performing group Restoration Through the Arts, RTA. They had a theater group at Sing Sing, and there's a movie about it that's fictionalized, and it's
Oh,
beautiful, and
okay.
it totally inspired me. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to get in a play now. So my next step after I start putting the stories together is probably audition for a couple plays, try to get at least a small role so I get comfortable on stage more
Yeah,
as an
yeah.
actor, actress. And so that's my goal. And then I was supposed to do my show this year at Beyond Baroque for one night. I don't know if that's going to happen with everything going on. I might do a social justice reading instead. And I
Yeah.
think that this one woman show is going to take a while to percolate. But I do have a play of this book.
Oh,
I did a
really?
3-act play, but I haven't released that, and it's a mess. So I mean, this could be turned into a play, but I think a one woman show is different.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds great. I have to listen to the podcast. Yeah, I mean, I haven't listened to it yet, so I'm excited to do that.
Hmm. But
Let's see.
usually the podcast is me doing what you're doing here, interviewing writers.
Yeah. So let's switch gears a little bit and talk about your writing itself. So, well, actually, before that, I'm curious about, so you're half Latina, right, on your
Hmm.
mother's side.
Yes.
Uh, did Latino literature influence your writing at all, or how familiar? Because in your book, you talk a lot about American writers, right, that
Hmm.
influenced you as a child. How about Latino literature?
Oh, definitely. I mean, when I got to college at UC Riverside, I studied under Professor Tiffany Anna Lopez, who's now the director of theater at UC Irvine. She was
Oh,
at
okay.
ASU for many years. She's super talented. She was the first person that took me to a play. She took her whole class of Latino literature students. Chicano literature was the class we took with her
Mm,
to go see Angels in America. She just said, "Hey, I want to take you all to a play. Do you guys want to go see Angels in America?" She got us free tickets on campus, took her whole class. She introduced me to Gary Soto. I already knew of Sandra
mm,
Cisneros. She introduced me to a lot of other Latino writers. So yes, I'm also a part of Macondo,
mhm.
which was started by Sandra Cisneros, and that's a writers workshop that happens every year in San Antonio. Sandra no longer runs it, but she's often there. We've met her, of course, and so
Yeah,
she's a
yeah.
huge influence on me. Other writers of Latino descent that have a huge influence on me are Stephanie Elizondo Grace, who wrote a number of books. She's coming out with a new book soon. She's more of a journalist, writer, essays, creative nonfiction. And obviously Sandra writes mostly fiction and, poetry and some memoir. So, I mean, yeah, Latino writers have had a huge, Junot Diaz, The
Yeah,
Brief and
yeah,
Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde is a huge
yeah.
influence on me. But even more so, if you haven't read his book of short stories, Drown, which is based on his
Mm.
life, there's a story in that book that really made me want to be a writer.
Oh, wow.
It's about the little kid is like I had a allergy to gas, and I think he had the same allergy as a kid. So his dad is a little abusive too, and his dad's like yelling at him for getting car sick in the car, and he rolls down the window. So I have a scene in
Yeah,
my book where I'm rolling down the window and I'm breathing in the wind, and
yeah.
it's a tribute to Juno. And I took
Ah,
VONA, which Juno started. So I've
okay.
taken, I've met Juno, and he's very inspirational. I know that there's some allegations, but they were
Yeah,
found
yeah.
found to be without merit for the most part.
Yeah,
So yeah.
he just has a great voice and all
Oh
his
my
writing.
gosh. He has this story I just read in my creative nonfiction class about a robbery that occurred when he was a kid. It's one of his few memoir pieces. It's pure
Mm.
memoir, and it's about like a bunch of money being stolen, and they stole his Lord of the Rings stuff and all his Dungeons and Dragons, and then he finds out it was his best friend. And
Oh,
oh my God, it's one of the best memoir stories I've ever read in my life. And so, writers like him, they can write anything. He writes
yeah, yeah,
dystopian, he writes fiction, he writes short stories that are auto fiction. He can
right.
write anything.
Yeah, 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 yeah. He's really, really, really good.
So,
Um,
probably as far as who inspired me, him the most. And of course, Sandra's House on Mango Street. My book is told in short vignettes. even
Right.
though mine's memoir. And
Right.
people often told me the young adult memoir thing doesn't exist. I said, yes, it does. House on Mango Street. Oh, that's fiction. Okay, well, it's kind of auto fiction.
Yeah.
And then I'm
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what about Frank McCourt, Angela's Ashes? That's a
Right.
young adult narrator who writes in present tense scene.
Right.
And they're
Right.
like, that's not a young adult memoir. I'm like, yes, it is. So I always knew what I
Yeah, it is.
wanted to do with my book. I got an offer to fictionalize it to get it
Yeah.
published sooner, and I turned that down. And it was my dream press.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
Yeah.
think the way that you did it is perfect. So aside from the Macondo, have you attended any other writers conferences? Do you like writers conferences? I love them. So
I used to attend a lot. AWP, I go every year, obviously. Not this year, even though it's in LA. I didn't get a panel. I usually get a panel. I always
mm,
apply. I love Lit Fest in the Dina. I've been to Macondo 3 times. I took a
wow.
class with Stephanie Elizondo Grist, Joy Castro, and then I worked on my play under a writer as well, remotely 1 year. I've done VONA. I was a repeat VONA. I went to VONA 4 times. I took Faith Adele, David Murrah, Andrew Pham, and one time I was a TA for VONA. So I was really involved with VONA when VONA was in its heyday, and VONA is for writers of color, started by Juno Diaz and other people.
Mm,
And they're not as prevalent now, but really at the time they were one of the only writers workshops for different people of color, like black people, white
yeah.
people. Like
Yeah.
you just had to be a person of color. It wasn't
Right.
like only Latino. And Macondo is not only Latino. Macondo is really a social justice organization.
Mm,
So it's not really about, it's about whether you're an ally. It's not whether
right.
you're
Right.
a person of color. It's people of color and their
Okay.
allies, and for
Okay.
writers who want to change the world. So any of you out
Yeah.
there, look at the Macondo website. They have a whole application process. Social justice is part of it. So for me,
Okay.
Macondo and VONA were the two big influences. I no longer serve on the board of Inlandia. I dropped out of that because I wanted to
Okay.
judge their book contest recently for the Eliot Martinez Prize, which Thomas Baiza won that. I
Mhm.
picked his book. It's coming out next year. It's called Mexican Teeth. If you have never read Thomas Baiza, Baiza, he's fantastic.
Okay.
He runs the writing center in Idaho at the
Wow.
university. Yeah, so he's a Latino in Idaho.
Wow. Okay.
And
Okay.
so yeah, so I and then Inlandia is a huge part of my life. Inlandia is the Inland Empire premier literary organization. They run workshops. So I've been to their workshops since I started writing. And then I had a writing group, Dr. Francis Barella from Mount Sac and Dr. Linda Hogan. What I would recommend to people if you can't travel, because right now I can't travel anymore. I have 3 young puppies. I help take care of my mother-in-law. I live with my husband. So, I mean, I have a lot going on at home and a full-time job and an MFA program online. So I can't travel like I used to.
Right. Right.
But what I would suggest is that people find a couple writers that they can write with consistently. I wrote this book. Um, I had a writing workshop. We met every month for 10 years.
So what do you think that writers get from conferences? Do you suggest that they look them up, either go in person
Mm-hmm.
or do online conferences?
I think in person's the best. I love AWP. A lot of people don't. They think it's elitist. I've made so many great connections there. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm just a social butterfly, anyways. I met one of my best friends, Michelle Gonzalez, there. I did a reading about being a witch when I was in high school, and she was there and came up to me, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, this punk rock idol, memoirist, punketta, professor." That's how I met her. So I mean, I don't discount in-person events. The
Right.
conferences are easier because you could go for 1 or 2 days. The
Yes.
1 week workshops are what I don't do anymore. I can't travel like that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think the in-person it's just
Mhm.
so nice because you never know who you're going to run into. You get access to editors, agents,
Mhm.
publishers. You get to meet people both in that formal and then informal setting after workshops. So
That's how
I
we
love.
met. We met at the Latino Book Festival.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, we had been friends on Facebook, but it's not,
Mhm.
it's not the same thing. There's so many people you don't really know, but when you see someone in person, you do make a connection. You're able to talk.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's much nicer.
And I'll say
Um,
this, every opportunity I've ever been gifted, and I do a lot of performing that I get paid for now. And I don't make money off my books. I haven't made a dime. And my
Yeah.
podcast, I've sucked my whole $10,000 grant into it over the years. So, I mean, the things I've been gifted are from my in-person networking. Meeting you,
Right.
I met a bunch of other people. People would, if you're a good person and you're reliable and you work hard and you're dependable and people can trust you, you will get just so much out of just networking and meeting people. And they'll be like, "Oh, you want to come to my school and talk? Do you want to be the writer for the week?" Do you know what I mean? I've been
Right.
gifted so many opportunities.
Right, right, right. It's more, much more than just what you learn at a workshop. It's
Hmm.
everything else that's connected to it. Yeah, for sure. And so you mentioned that you don't make any money off your books. So a lot of writers think that they're going to write and they're going to, they're going to be bestsellers and they're going to make a lot of money. So
I
what
know
keeps
one. I know one
yeah,
that got a
well, I know
seven-figure
a few
deal.
that
Yeah.
support themselves, but it's
Hmm.
not what people think. They think, oh, you wrote
Mm-mm.
a book, you're a millionaire, right? You make a lot of money,
Mm-mm.
and it's not like that. So what keeps you writing if it's not any financial rewards?
I have a full-time job. I'm blessed. I'm
Yeah,
a lawyer.
yeah,
And I have a job where I work my 40, 50 hours a week, and then I do my other stuff on the side. And I'm able to do that and balance it because I don't have kids mostly. Um, but I think that for me, it's about being read. It's not about selling my books. If I'm at a
okay,
conference and someone can't afford my book, I'll give it to them. I want them to read it. I
yeah,
recently, thanks to you, I went to Cal State San Bernardino and they bought 100 of my books and gave them away. And that
yes,
was my dream, is for
yes,
people to have my book in hand. That's all I care about. I don't
yes.
care about selling them. I really don't.
Well, don't say
And
that,
yeah, yeah,
but
no, maybe it's my
you want to buy
downside.
her book. You do. It's a
Yeah.
great book.
Yeah, so
Oh
buy
yeah,
it and read it or get it from the library. The best thing someone can do for me is either review it on Amazon or ask your library to stock it. For
yes,
me, I
yes.
really want to be in every library.
Right, right, right. So reviews definitely they absolutely help writers. It's a great gift, especially if you enjoyed the book, to review
Hmm.
it. So definitely a great.
Recently, I went to go read at a high school virtually with this professor or teacher Joe Lopez who teaches in LA. And I
Mm,
loved his class. It was a bunch of young Mexican kids, and they
yeah.
just dug my stories. They were cracking up the whole time. And two of them went on Amazon and reviewed my book and wrote beautiful reviews. And
Oh,
one of them said I was really funny. And
oh, how
honestly, I
nice.
needed to hear that because I know I'm funny, but everyone, my husband and other people tell me I'm not. My sister's like, "You're not that funny." My husband's like, "You're not that funny." I'm like, "I think I'm funny." And then my friends are like, "No, you're kind of funny, not pee your pants funny, but you're like chuckle funny." And so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
needed a third party to tell me, even if they're only 16 years old, I'm
Right.
funny.
It's also very nice to know that you're reaching different audiences. So
Yeah.
not only, does an old person like me really enjoy your book because I remember the 80s, but a 16-year-old who really loves your stories. And I think it's your voice as well, because yeah, you're funny and you have a very approachable voice when you write.
I tried to transcend time. I mean, I did want to put in enough pop culture to set in time, but not so much that someone that's a young kid now wouldn't identify with it. And a lot of the
Yeah.
stuff they can look up, like what's Facts of Life,
Yeah,
what's
yeah,
Different Strokes,
yeah.
what's Chips.
And you can, even as a young person, though, it's kind of cool to be able to read and say, oh, what was it like? What was it like?
Hmm.
Especially, they might not be able to relate to their parents,
Yeah,
but they could read a story like yours and say, oh, okay, well, that's what it was like for mom back then, right? So,
yeah.
yeah.
And we're
So,
lucky because if we turn our books into movies,
mhm,
it won't be a kid on the cell phone the whole time.
yeah,
That's the
right.
difference between our childhood and childhood now.
Yeah, yeah,
Ours were full of adventure.
yes.
I took a story that I have never written it, but it was on my list to write about hitchhiking when I was a kid. And then I thought I
Mm.
don't really want to put that in there. I don't want to encourage kids to hitchhike. It's
Yeah,
super
I don't even think
dangerous.
people would do that these days, though. No, because my husband talks about that, and his friends and stuff, they would hitchhike. And
Uh-huh.
it's like, wow,
Mhm.
even what, he's like 9, 10 years older than me. by the time I was a kid, that wasn't okay.
Oh, it wasn't okay. We were told not. They actually had like public service announcements about it.
Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
hitchhike, because it was a big thing in the 70s. By the
exactly.
80s, it was out of style. But I did
Right.
hitchhike once. I've never written that story, but it was a bad experience actually with me and my
Oh,
best
well, maybe
friend,
you
Melinda.
should. Maybe you should. It might be
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Or I could
So what
fictionalize
advice
it.
do you have for writers that are just starting out? They want to write a memoir about their life. They want to maybe fictionalize it.
I would say trust your voice. And I'll tell you this. Some of the earliest stories in Tales of an Inland Empire Girl were written like 15 years ago, and I cannot write like that anymore. I wish I could. They're
Yeah,
raw, they're real, they're not perfect. They're not, I think I've almost overeducated myself on creative writing in some ways. So I would
yeah.
say just write the stories and do not delete them. Save everything. I have stories from my 20s that I threw away, and poetry that I threw away
Oh,
when I
oh,
stopped writing in my 20s after I took a creative writing class and the teacher said that I was melodramatic. It's like, of course I'm melodramatic. I'm Latina and I grew up
yeah.
reading Harlequin romance novels. Come on. Yeah.
Yep, yep.
So trust your voice, trust that your story has value. And if you
Okay.
can do that and you can just put it on the page, whether you publish it now or later, I think it's important. And I also write a blog that is my real voice. Um,
Okay.
so I created a character in Tales of an Inland Empire Girl and in
Sure.
Portrait in some ways. But my blog is me writing about my life now. And that's the
Mm,
truest voice of who I am. And I just do that so I can kind of memorialize my life. And I have
yeah,
12 years of, I think I have a couple thousand stories on that blog by now.
yeah,
And they're
yeah.
not publishable quality, but they're little things that later I could pick up and go,
Mm-hmm.
hey, that happened. Let me expand this into a story, or one day take the whole blog and try to create something out of it. And that
Yeah.
blog, I started with one person reading it, two people. Now it's like 5 to 10,000 a month, and I don't even know who reads it. I don't charge for
Wow.
it. I don't do ads because they would put
Yeah.
weird right wing or Christian ads on my page. And I'm like, no. So I stopped
Yeah.
the ads. I don't make any money on it, but
Yeah.
it's almost like an ongoing journal, like a Substack.
Right,
But
right,
I've
right.
had it so long that I don't want to convert it. It's just a blog that I
Yeah.
update twice a week, once a week
Wow.
minimum. I've been doing that for 12 years.
Wow. That's
So
great.
when the dogs got hurt, when I adopted my puppies, when my
Yeah.
dog
Yeah.
Chewbacca died last year, all that's on there. My whole
Yeah.
life's on there in a way.
That's
So it's
amazing.
interesting.
Yeah, you probably will use that in the future, I'm guessing,
Mm-hmm.
because you have all that information in there and
Mm-hmm.
all those different stories that, one day, one thing about memoir, that I'm not a memoir writer, but I love memoirs. I read them. And what I've learned about them is that, it's really not the story of your life, but you have
Right.
collections of stories that when you're writing them, you don't really see a theme, but eventually you can connect different things and create, see a theme and create a book of
Mm-hmm.
all these stories.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that at some point, especially 12 years, wow, that's
Yeah.
a lot of stories that you probably can pull from.
Yeah,
So
and I love essay
fantastic.
collections personally. I think Curtis Sittenfeld recently wrote one of my favorite essays. She wrote Prep, a young adult novel set in like a facts of life kind of boarding school, but then she wrote a
Yeah.
book of essays, and her book of essays is one of my favorite book of essays of all time. I
Mm,
love essays. I
yeah.
love writing essays. I love reading collections of essays, but they need, like you said, you need to find the link between them. You can't
Right.
just stuff a bunch of essays in a book. There has
Right.
to be a narrative thread, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So how does, since you're in this MFA program
Hmm.
now you've started this after you've written and published. I did the same. I did an
During.
program after the fact.
Hmm.
How does that, do you recommend that writers get an MFA? Do they need formal training in order to write? How does it help you?
I think craft is important. I think feedback's important, but I think you have to be mature enough that you can take the good and get rid of the rest.
Hmm.
Take what's valuable and constructive, and anything mean or ugly, just throw that away and not listen to it.
Yeah.
I am a very weird situation. So I started my MFA 5 years ago, one class at a time at the University of New Orleans. They're very flexible. It's online only, it's state tuition. I'm paying out of pocket for each class, so I only do one class a semester. I'm going to
Wow.
probably graduate in another year and a half if I can load up on a couple of classes and do my thesis. But I actually published my books after I had started the program. So
Oh, okay.
my application, so I got into UC Riverside with a fully funded brick and mortar offer with a stipend to teach and stuff, but they wanted me to quit my job. And I
Mm,
have a pension that
yeah.
accumulates for every year I'm a public defender. So for me, quitting my job was not an option, nor was I
No.
willing to do that. And I couldn't get a sabbatical. We didn't
Right.
have them at the time. So I ended up just going to UNO. I sent them this book as my application, like parts of it. They accepted me. And then I worked on the book the first year I was in the program. And
Oh,
I
okay.
fine tuned, especially the last story in the book, is because of my professor told me that story about living in the trailer park with my parents when I'm 19 or 20, that I needed to flash forward to my dad's death. So I did
Mm,
little edits in the classes. I had already written all these stories, but then I would submit some of them and say, hey, this is a story I've already had, but what do you guys think of
yeah.
it? Does it need anything? So I got really lucky. And so I published my books the first year I was in the program, but I didn't really, they were already done for the most part.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so I love
Great.
my MFA program.
Yeah.
But I am going very slow and low. I
Yeah.
would not recommend taking out debt for an MFA program personally. My
Right.
MFA, the entire thing is going to cost me about 27,000 at the end of it, but I am taking
Oh
one
my God.
$1,600 class at a time. So I'm
Wow.
paying that out of pocket. I don't have a new car. I don't have a car payment. My student loans were forgiven. So I can afford to do this slow and low.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and there's pressure on me to graduate. Like, Juanita, can you take 2 classes? But I don't like to like stress out. I want this to
Right.
be fun. And even if I dropped out and never got my degree, it doesn't really matter because I wrote my play. I took a playwriting class with a very famous professor in New Orleans, and he's written like plays and put them on stages in New Orleans. He helped me convert my book into a play. He gave me his play and said,
Yeah.
use this as your template.
Yeah. It sounds like
It's
for
worth
you, the
thousands of
MFA
dollars.
program
Yeah.
it's just gives you the opportunity to write and to
Yeah.
find readers and to just grow as a writer.
Yeah.
You're not doing it to, like, for me, I did it because I wanted to teach. It's like I'm
Mm.
already a writer, I already published. I
Yeah.
need this
You
MFA
already
because
had
I want
multiple
to teach.
books. Yeah.
Right, right. So, yeah, so I think you have to really know maybe why you're doing it.
Mhm.
What's your, what's your goal? And you're right, not go into debt because
Mm-mm.
I did go into debt, but again, I had the goal of teaching. So
Exactly.
it was
And
different.
I do want to teach when I retire, but it's going to be like, one class or do my
Yeah,
own class, and the MFA will help with that.
right, right.
I would also love to start publishing other people. I think I have a really good eye. I
Yeah.
read really quick. I read a lot, and whenever I just know, I mean, I've turned down people on my podcast by the first page of their book. I can just tell whether I like it or not.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, so I mean, I think I have a good eye. I would love to get into publishing when I retire or some kind of something
right.
to do with publishing. I'm really fascinated by publishing other people's works and amplifying their voices. I think it's really important, especially incarcerated writers would really interest me.
Mm. Yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
that'd be interesting. Well, I was going to ask you then about future projects. So that's kind of off in the distance, right? Are
Hmm.
there other projects that you're working on that are coming up?
I think I've talked to you offline, obviously, about fiction. And so I started this book called The Runaway,
Mm.
about young Latina girl who doesn't have three sisters. She has one, or two sisters. She has one sister, growing up in the IE, who decides to, it's the 80s, but she's stuck in 70s punk, and she thinks the punk scene is still alive in New York City. So she's going to run
Okay.
away to New York. And she wants
Ah,
to see CBGB. She wants to meet all the punkers, but they're all gone. It's all new wave. But she doesn't
yeah.
know that. She's just like, okay, I'm going to go to New York. That's the punk rock capital. Probably by the 80s, LA is more the punk rock capital, which she's very close to. So she runs away to New York. So I've been working on little short vignettes of this novella for a long time. And it's very hard for me to write fiction, is what I've realized.
Mm.
I'm having a very hard time, and
That's interesting
I've
because
put it aside.
your memoir is, I mean, it could be fiction.
Hmm.
Really good, you
Yeah.
know?
So I
Yeah.
have a hard time divorcing this character on the page from me. So I think
Okay.
I have a hard time letting go
Yes.
generally. Memoir is very easy for me because it's really just telling the story the way you remember it,
Yeah.
fact checking it. And if you love writing, it almost sometimes comes out automatic. Fact checking it, working on it. I love editing it, putting it aside, going back to it, fine tune. I just wrote like an essay about me and my Wonder Twin, and it has memoir and essay. It's more braided. I loved
Hmm.
working on that project. I found it very easy.
Yeah.
Fiction
Yeah.
is different. It's about letting go, seeing where the story takes you. I'm not good at that. I'm not
Yeah.
good at
Putting
like,
yourself into
yeah.
that character's head, putting yourself
Hmm.
into that character and living that character's
Hmm.
life. That I think that is the hardest part, is not thinking about what you would do, but what would that character do if you were that character living that life? How would you react?
Yeah.
So yeah, it is. It's different, but yeah, also a lot of fun. So
Yeah, and
okay,
I've read
so
your fiction and you lose yourself in it. It's not you. And so I'm trying
right,
to get there. So
yeah,
I haven't worked on that for a year almost. I got to go back to it. I've written it
yeah,
on my blog unpublished, so it's just little pieces on my blog. That's how I've been saving them.
right.
Um yeah, and I write a lot on my phone now.
Wow, really?
Hmm. Because I
Wow.
have a neck issue. So when I get home from work, I'm in so much pain usually that
So
I'll
you
just
write with your thumbs on the phone?
and I can write a whole story. I wrote a story for class on my
Oh my
phone.
God.
And then I
Wow,
just cut
wow.
and paste it into an email. And then when I go to my computer, cut and paste it into a Word document.
Wow. Wow,
I
that's
think it's just
great.
easier for me.
And I
I
think
write my,
a lot of young writers probably could do that too. I
mhm.
can't I don't even like to text. I write so short because I don't like to write on a phone.
Once you get used to it, I started
Yeah.
doing it for my blog because I'd be driving with my husband and I want to do something.
Yeah.
I would just blog something and I started doing it on my phone. I'm like, oh, this isn't that bad. And a lot of the stuff self corrects now because of
Yes.
AI. I don't use any kind
Yes.
of AI except for the self correcting.
Yes, yes. Right. And you have to be careful because it will change what you
Hmm.
were trying to say. So,
Hmm.
um, all right. Well, thank you. So how can viewers find you online? So you have your blog, you have your podcast, website. So tell us how to find you.
You can find everything at juanitaemantz.com. That's my website that has my podcast, my blog. You can find me at Instagram at Life of Gem. That's JEM1. And then on Facebook, I have a Life of Gem Facebook page where I post all my podcasts and all my videos. And then, yeah, I'm easy to
Excellent.
find.
Okay. And I will link that below so that people can click and find you. So my last question is, I think we all have a superpower.
Mm.
So what do you see as your superpower as a writer?
I think I love writers. I love making friends. And I think other than rock stars, which most writers are frustrated rock stars in some way, I think writers are the coolest people ever. And I feel like it's not a superpower, but I'm so blessed because when I was a little girl and I would read books on my roof when my parents were fighting, I would always dream myself into the books and want to be a writer. And now I get to be a writer. I get to hang out with writers. I get to go to writing events. I curate a lot of performing and writing events for other writers and myself. I just think I'm just so blessed. It's like a dream
Yeah,
come true. And I get to do it and have a full-time job. And
yeah, yeah,
most jobs won't allow that. So I'm really lucky.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree. I think being a writer is a superpower because you are creating something out of nothing, really, out of your head. You're bringing it to life for other people to see and enjoy and experience. So, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for
Thank
being here.
you.
I'm
Thank you
so
for
happy
having
that
me.
we've met, that we've become friends, and
Yeah.
to have you here.
Let's try to go get Mexican food soon in San Bernardino.
Yes, yes, definitely. All right, Juanita, take care.
Okay, take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.